Perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Pennsylvania's Clean Energy Future, How Climate, Energy, and Health Intersect. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Nina Gentariel, and I am the Pennsylvania Alliance of Nurses Healthy Environment Nurse Advocacy Coordinator for Pennsylvania. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank you all for being here today to be part of this important conversation. Just a few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and we'll share the link afterwards. Please stay muted during the presentation, but feel free to add your questions and comments in the chat. We'll have time for a Q&A afterward. And finally, we encourage you to please stay connected with us after today's event to continue your own advocacy work. So before we dive into today's discussion, just want to take a moment about who we are and why this work matters so deeply to us. So the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environment, or ANI, is a national organization that brings together nurses and health professionals to address the critical connections between health, equity, and the environment. Our mission is simple yet powerful: to mobilize nurses to protect the public's health by promoting healthy people and healthy environment. We believe that every person has the right to clean air, safe water, and a stable climate, and that as nurses, we are the most trusted profession and have a vital role in playing that. Our vision is a world where all communities can thrive in environments that are sustainable and support of health for generations to come. So as we think about how nurses can make an impact in Pennsylvania's clean energy, it's important to recognize the power and reach of our collective voice. So ANI has built truly a national and increasingly global movement of nurses advocating for climate and environmental health. We're proud to support a community of more than 10,000 members across the country, nurses working in hospitals, public health, academia, and communities. We have the Nurses Climate Challenge with over 60 schools of nursing signed on. We also have 2,000 nurses participating in our online forums, sharing best practices. And each year, we have 420 nurses trained through our leadership program to become champions in environmental health. Our reach extends far beyond the US, with 70 partnerships with nursing and health organizations around the world, working toward a common goal of healthier people on a healthier planet. So together, this network represents not just numbers, but a growing, trusted public health voice that can help shape energy, climate, and health policy in meaningful ways. I also want to take a moment to highlight the Pennsylvania Nurse Advocacy Network. The Pennsylvania Nurse Advocacy Network is an initiative that connects nurses across the Commonwealth who are passionate about making a difference. The network brings together nurses from all practice settings, from bedside to public health, academia, and community, creating a space to learn, collaborate, and lead on issues that impact both our patients and the planet. So through this network, we offer opportunities for education, such as today's webinar, as well as advocacy and coalition partnerships at the state level. This helps ensure that the nursing voice is represented in climate, clean energy, and environmental health policy discussions right here in Pennsylvania. Most importantly, the Pennsylvania Nurse Advocacy Network is about empowering nurses to act locally, whether that means speaking to a legislator, participating in a campaign, or bringing clean energy and sustainability efforts into your own health systems and communities. So if you're not part of our listserv and would like to stay connected and like to receive updates on events, opportunities, and advocacy actions, please email me after today's webinar. I'll make sure you're added. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker for today. So Rob Altenberg is the Senior Director for Energy and Climate at Penn Future. With over 33 years of experience in environmental, climate, and energy issues, he regularly works for policymakers and industry experts to shape sustainable energy policies. In addition to testifying before various governmental bodies, including the White House and the US Senate, he has been featured in major media outlets like ABC, NBC, NPR, and Fortune magazine. He is also co-author a book chapter on federal climate policy and frequently speaks to community groups about these issues. Outside of Penn Future, Rob is an adjunct professor teaching environmental law at Widener Commonwealth Law School and teaches undergraduate courses in law and ethics at Eastern Mennonite University. Before his current role, he spent nearly 22 years with the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, working on air quality, energy, and public health issues. He has also served in the U.S. Army Reserve, where he commanded a combat engineer company. Rob holds a Juris Doctor degree from Widener Commonwealth Law School and is admitted to practice in Pennsylvania and before the U.S. Supreme Court. So, Rob, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, and I will just share my slides here and there. And yeah, thank you everybody for coming. Again, Rob Altenberg from Penn Future. We're a statewide environmental advocacy organization. We have offices across Pennsylvania. Our Harrisburg office, this is one of the reasons I like to start talks with this picture, is in this nice picture of the Pennsylvania State Capitol, there's only one building with solar panels, and it's a little white building in the lower left-hand corner, little white roofed building, and that's our office. So we're the outpost of clean energy in the whole Capitol complex. So we'll be talking today about some of the current events that are going on related to the Inflation Reduction Act, what's happening recently, and a lot of really the current events of what's happening in Pennsylvania at the moment, partially in response to a lot of changes on the federal scale. Now, the Inflation Reduction Act was the signature piece of legislation, the Biden-era legislation passed in 2022. And it covered much more than just environmental investments, certainly a lot of infrastructure investments for roadways and transit and other infrastructure, a good bit of public health investments, related to prescription prices and things like that, but just focusing on the environmental side of it, and particularly those areas that are impacting Pennsylvania. So this was a program that was designed to create literally thousands of clean energy jobs, and the investment showed up in a lot of different places. The $171 million for EV infrastructure in Pennsylvania. This is part of the NEVI program, the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. This is a funding source for a lot of the vehicle chargers that we've seen. You'll see a number of like convenience stores and places like that. We're seeing an expanding electric vehicle charging network. That's all coming out of this NEVI funding. They had transportation funding supporting transit. One of the big ones in Pennsylvania is, well, the RISE PA program. This is I believe, the largest clean energy grant program ever established in Pennsylvania, and it was $396 million for industrial decarbonization. So whether it's looking at things like green steel or manufacture of concrete or any of these like large industries that are really high carbon industries, this is a program. It's an ongoing program that's targeted at reducing carbon pollution there. Um, there's a number of grant programs funded out of this. One of the biggest ones, there has actually been a long-running grant for energy efficiency and clean energy infrastructure. In clean energy, it was the production tax credit and the investment tax credit. Um, for example, like this year, if you would put solar panels on your roof, there would be a 30% tax credit available for that. That was, or there had been tax credits prior to the Inflation Reduction Act. They were actually declining, but that set them at 30% and extended the tax credits. So a huge amount of investment across the clean energy sphere. What we're seeing now is wide-ranging cuts to these programs, and a lot of these are the status is really unclear. There have been cuts announced to the programs, or there have been programs that have been formally cut. There have been programs that were cut in the recent One Big Beautiful Bill that was passed. That cut some programs. There have been programs that have not been cut, but the federal government has been withholding funding on them, and there's ongoing legal challenges about that. Um, there have been cuts that have been announced, but it's not clear whether those have been acted on or made official or yet. So we really, aren't clear on the status of them. Uh, but on the slide here, there's a mix of the things that we're seeing. The $182 million of investments that have been delayed or canceled, and we keep hearing things like solar projects that have been canceled or ones where the permitting have been delayed. Particularly solar and wind projects are at high risk for that. The hydrogen hubs projects, there's actually two of those that impacted Pennsylvania. There was a Eastern hydrogen hub, the Mach 2 hub, and the Western hydrogen hub, the Arch 2 hub. Originally, it was expected that Mach 2 would be cut because that was primarily based on clean energy, and we weren't sure about Arch 2 because a lot of the hydrogen there would be sourced from fracked gas. Recently, we saw announcements where all of the hydrogen hubs would be terminated. Although, that's something we're continuing to track. The NEVI funding, that was the EV vehicle funding I mentioned earlier. We had funding frozen and then lawsuits related to that. We just heard recently that some of that funding was going to be released. Again, this is an ongoing situation there. The tariffs that we're seeing is another constantly changing program. When it comes to particularly solar, a good percentage of the solar panels, most of the solar panels are manufactured overseas, and they're subject to tariffs, seemingly constantly changing tariffs, and that will potentially impact the availability. Although there's a fair stockpile of solar panels in the United States that are pre-tariff. That's that is, again, constantly changing. One thing that we're seeing in particular impacting Pennsylvania, and this is not related to the Inflation Reduction Act particularly, but we're seeing a very little known part of the Federal Power Act called 202C. And what that does is it's designed for, in an emergency situation, the government can tell a power plant that it must run, and even if it has to violate its air pollution or environmental pollution permit limits to do so. That was designed really out of experience in World War I, where there was a fear that we would have a shortage of power. So when the Federal Power Act was written, they put in this provision to say, in the national emergency situation, if the technology to, um, if it's needed to operate the power plant, the government can order that. What we saw in Pennsylvania is there's one particular plant, the Eddystone power plant, that has, well, two of its gas turbines uh, basically were not running. They'd run in the past, the latest data we had was maybe 3 or 4 days a year they would be turned on. It was a very expensive plant, very old plant, past its normal lifespan. They were to shut down last May, and they got approval from our grid operator to shut down. And the Trump administration ordered them to stay open until August. We believe it cost about $5 million to keep it open. The plant may have run on 2 or 3 days during that time period, and not all complete days at that. Um, as it approached the August date where the plant was again, where the order would expire and the plant could shut down, there was another 202C order. So now the plant is extended another 3 months um, to keep this plant operating. Again, very expensive. The grid operator already determined that it wasn't necessary for that plant to run, but we're seeing these orders saying that these plants can stay open even if they violate their air permits. Um, we've seen a lot of uncertainty around the LIHEAP program. This is the Low Income Heating Assistance Program in Pennsylvania. Uh, and in Pennsylvania, there are provisions in the winter months. Utilities aren't allowed to shut off, gas or electricity for low-income families, and there's programs that allow bill assistance and things like that. Some states have it in the summer months as well, which there's a lot of advocacy for in Pennsylvania, but we don't have yet. Um, Unfortunately, the funding for these programs in LIHEAP, a lot of this comes from federal funding, and with federal uncertainty and with a state budget uncertainty, we're seeing a delay start to these programs. And as we're getting into the colder months, that will be very problematic. One other recent thing we're seeing in the news is the Solar for Schools program. Um, um, this is a program, well, it was passed, and then the funding source for that is in part it's caught up in the state budget, the lack of a state budget, not having the funding source for that. But one of the benefits that the schools could have in that would be federal benefits out of the IRA. That those are now set to expire at the end of the year. So we had a program. Well, we still have a program that is designed to increase, solar and clean energy at schools in the Commonwealth. Um, Part of the program was likely still continue, but some of the benefits that encourage schools to do that may go away at the end of the year with the changes with the repeals related to the IRA. So a lot of stuff is happening. We had some really good programs. Almost across the board, the programs that we had are either expiring or money is being withheld or they're directly under threat. So particularly on the federal side, folks look at that and say, there's really, what avenues do we have to do on the federal side? Everything we're seeing there is really trying to minimize the effect of bad things that are happening. We're certainly not seeing any new innovative clean energy work coming out of the federal government. But that leaves Pennsylvania. And what is Pennsylvania going to do? And we are lucky in a large perspective. We have an environmental rights amendment. We were the first state that had one, and we're one of the few states that does. And this really set a model. This is an amendment that was added to our state constitution in the 1970s, early 1970s. It actually passed unanimously in our House and Senate on two separate occasions. So it was not a controversial bill at all when it passed, and it passed a statewide referendum to become part of our constitution. But it does some interesting things. And one of the things is it says we have a right, we the people have a right to clean air, pure water, and the preservation of the environment. Um, it says that our public natural resources, which is that clean air and pure water, are the property of all the people. It affirmatively says that that is part of our property, part of part of what we as residents of Pennsylvania own. And perhaps most importantly, it has this trust provision where it says the Commonwealth, and in this context, the Commonwealth is talking about the government apparatus of Pennsylvania. Uh, the Commonwealth is the trustee of these resources. And for many years, the courts really didn't apply this. But recently, we've seen a number of decisions up through our state Supreme Court that have said, no, this is we know what trustees do. If somebody has a trustee for their retirement program or something like that, they have a fiduciary duty to act for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And whatever they do, they must really put themselves in the beneficiary's shoes and do what's good for them. And what our Constitution says is the Commonwealth is the trustee and we are the beneficiaries. And what they have to do is conserve and maintain the environment for our benefit. And it has a very, very powerful statement. Uh, this provision, this is in Article 1 of our state constitution, and that is effectively the Bill of Rights in the Pennsylvania state constitution. This is the same article where we have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, right to assembly, and all of those rights that we're very familiar with and people take very, very seriously. Uh, Environmental rights are right up there with all of these. So our Commonwealth, our government does have a responsibility to act in our benefit, and we're seeing them actually, we're seeing changes made actually in response to this, although it's been again since the 1970s since that happened. So the government has to do something. And what do we do to address climate change in Pennsylvania? And clean electricity is really the core to this. If you look where the carbon pollution is coming from in the state, I usually simplify it and say it's about thirds, where a third being electric generation, about a third being transportation, and about a third being everything else. It's not quite exactly that. You can see the breakdowns here. But electric generation certainly cleaning up the electric grid, more wind, more solar, storage, energy efficiency, all those things like that, very effective, to reduce carbon pollution. Transportation, the real solution there, electrification of our vehicle fleets is probably the most cost-effective way to address transportation pollution. Right now, even given today's grid, an electric car will emit less than any internal combustion car. So even if your power is coming from the grid, electric vehicles today are still a benefit. Uh, what we're seeing though is as we clean the grid, that makes electric vehicles even cleaner compared to other vehicles. Um, Electrification is also really key in industrial decarbonization. And industrial decarbonization is really hard to address, where in power plants, there's a certain number of power plant technologies, and most of them are very, very similar to each other. And in the transportation sector, you have cars and you have airplanes and you have trains and things like that, but individually, cars are very similar to other cars. Industrial, it gets challenging because they're very different. Every installation is potentially different. But electrification, again, is a big key to address industrial emissions. One of the problems we're having with electrification is, as everybody has probably noticed, their electric bills went up. These numbers were, I just picked out three of the big utilities in Pennsylvania, but it's really happening across the state. We're seeing basically 5 to 20% increases in in everybody's electric bill. Um, and when the electric bills are increasing, that makes certainly electrification more challenging. So there's a big question about why is this happening and what are the results of this? Now, I mean, some of the concerns there, when we see high energy prices, we have a fairly large number of people in what they call energy poverty in Pennsylvania. There are plenty of families that more than 30% of their income is spent on energy. Uh, so a huge impact from even very minor changes in energy costs, and that has some results. Certainly, underheating and undercooling has health and safety impacts across the state. In both cases, you see well, underheating and undercooling are related to like increases in cardiac events, increases in hospitalization. We see this. We'll see people that if they're don't have can't afford electricity or can't afford heating oil or can't afford something else that they're using in their house, they'll be using another maybe less effective method, using their stove as a heater, which has safety risks associated with that. Um, and they'll also use maybe more polluting sources if they if they can't afford the electric heat. Uh, Maybe whether they'll resort to coal or something else in some cases, um, increasing pollution from that. So there's those health and safety impacts. There's also just the financial impacts of having the higher bills and having to make spending choices, whether it's between electricity and food or electricity and healthcare and all of these other things. You have those direct financial impacts that leads to chronic stress. Chronic stress has its own health impacts related to it. And we also see particular impacts in environmental justice communities. So the environmental justice communities are, we'll see across the state, really across the country, um, poor communities typically, and it's usually characterized as either poor communities or communities with minority communities, tend to be where polluting resources get located. Uh, so we have small communities that have a disproportionate burden of the environmental impacts. Um, we'll see this, many places across Pennsylvania. The city of Chester was one of the first places this was really noted, where you have a lot of things like trash combustion and garbage disposal happening, in this very small area that also has chronically high like asthma rates and a lot of other environmental burdens going along with it. And these high energy prices impact all of this. Um, so there's a question about why that's happening, and a lot of it right now, at least this price range we saw this past June, this 5 to 20% price increase, really comes from decisions made from our grid operator. Um, we hear a lot of reasons why it might be, but a lot of it were policy decisions. So our power grid, we are part of what's known as PJM, and that used to stand for Pennsylvania, Jersey, Maryland. Now it's quite a bit bigger. It extends from North Carolina to Chicago, and about 60 million people get their power from this power grid. So the P and PJM, that was Pennsylvania, and it's headquartered here in Valley Forge. That picture on the right is their control center. And they really control our power grid. They don't own any of the resources on the grid, but they are the operators. Some of the problems that they've been facing is we have a large number of energy projects that want to join, that want to get built, and they've been in a backlog getting permission from PJM to join our power grid for over 5 years now in some cases. Um, the overwhelming number of those are solar and storage projects. So lots and lots of clean energy projects trying to join the grid, but they've just been stalled and not actually been able to join the grid. Um, Along with that, there is an overdependence on gas on the grid. More than 60% of our generation is coming from gas, and that's creating certainly the direct pollution problems related to fracking and gas emissions, but that's also impacting, and we'll see the cost of energy on our grid. And there's essentially broken market rules that are making this difficult to change. The We are hearing in the news about increasing demand from data centers, particularly data centers, and AI is big in the news today. Uh, PPL, or one of our utilities, just recently filed a rate case with the Public Utility Commission where they say the demand on their grid, they're projecting it to double as a result of data centers and AI construction. Across PJM, they're talking about 30 more gigawatts of generation, which is a very, very large amount of generation. A relatively large power plant is 1 gigawatt. Um, so this, if it does get built, would be a lot of new generation. Might not all get built. Um, some of that is cryptocurrency, which is a separate issue. But again, we're seeing potentially some increasing data center demand. There's a possibility of increasing demand from electric vehicles. They're certainly increasing, um, not not projected to increase nearly at the rate that that data centers are, and we're also seeing a lot of federal resistance now to electric vehicles. And those, other electrification issues and electric vehicles and other electrification are actually positive. We want to see that. We want to see more electric vehicles than gas vehicles, and we want to see people choose, high efficiency electric heat pumps, maybe over gas or fuel oil or coal or other heating sources. So the increasing demand isn't necessarily bad, but we're getting very, very high projections of demand. And along with that, we're not increasing our supply at the same rate. Again, we're saying 30 gigawatts of power of demand might join the grid from data centers. Well, last time I checked a few weeks ago, there were 43 gigawatts of projects waiting to interconnect that could not. So this mismatch would by itself create uh, increase in prices. Um, Pennsylvania is in a little bit of a unique position. Um, in the old days, and when I say old days, it's 25 years ago or so, we were a vertically integrated state. So your electric utility owned everything from the power plant to your electric meter. And if the electric utility wanted to build a new power plant, they would go to the Public Utility Commission, get permission to build the plant. If the Public Utility Commission said they could, they would very easily get funding for that because essentially their profit was guaranteed. They, had part of their deal with the Public Utility Commission was how much ratepayers were going to be charged for this new plant. So it was a reasonably streamlined system. We don't do that anymore. We do we have a system now where if you own a power plant, well, utilities don't own power plants in Pennsylvania anymore. If somebody does own a power plant and they want to run tomorrow, they have to go to PJM and really compete in an auction today. And when the auction closes at 4 o'clock today, we'll know which plants are going to get called to run tomorrow. And what PJM does is they call the lower price plants up first, and then go progressively higher price, higher price, higher price until they get to the amount of energy they need. That creates whatever the clearing price is, and everybody that runs gets that amount. it's really good for keeping prices low, but it doesn't send a very long-term price signal. If you don't know you're going to run tomorrow until this afternoon, it becomes more challenging to get financing. And this is, I see the question in the chat about why these plants aren't being built. Part of it is just the queue process is just approval process was not built for initially for a lot of plants, a lot of small plants to be joining, and they're just behind, very, very far behind on processing them. But now, even when they can get out of the queue, it's very challenging to get financing when you can't tell a bank you're going to run the next day. One of the things that we do to solve that problem, to send a signal to plants to get built, is by a thing called capacity prices. And this is a very similar auction where a plant is not selling energy. They are promising to be available typically 3 years down the road. And in return for that promise to be available when needed, they get guaranteed payments. In 24-25, those guaranteed payments were about $30 a megawatt day through across Pennsylvania throughout much of our grid. What happened this past June, we went from $30 a megawatt day to $270 a megawatt day. So the prices that we're paying these plants, absolutely skyrocketed. The next year, these prices are going up again to $329 a megawatt day. That's actually hitting a cap, where after this last auction that set these prices high in June, Governor Shapiro actually sued PJM. And as part of their settlement, they set a cap to what the prices could be for the next 2 years. And we hit the cap. So next year it's going to be 329. It'll probably be about that the following year. And then after that deal expires, it could get even higher after that. That's $16 billion we are paying to facilities just to promise to be available in that year to run, whether they sell any energy or not. One of the big reasons why this is happening really comes back to issues we've had with with reliability of gas plants. So we're hearing data centers, but really the data centers aren't here yet. Data centers are coming. It's certainly an issue, but the biggest single factor in those prices shooting up was gas reliability. And we saw this in Pennsylvania in Winter Storm Elliott in 2022, where nearly a quarter of all of the generation on our grid failed during a winter storm, Christmas Eve into Christmas of 2022. And most of this was, well, almost all of them, they failed with less than an hour's notice, and mostly it was no notice at all. So the grid operator would go to a power plant and say, we're having a great emergency. You need to turn on, you need to run. And the power plant said they can't. Of those failures, 70% of the failures were gas plants. And there were a lot of reasons why that was happening. A gas plant individually might be reasonably reliable, but they're all connected to the same pipelines. So if there is a supply disruption issue, you get many plants tend to fail at once. On that pipeline, gas plants have municipal heat has priority over gas plants. We cannot shut off gas to municipalities during winter storms. So that creates supply problems. We had problems at wellheads where the fracking wells were actually frozen up and their equipment they couldn't deliver. And we had maintenance issues at the gas plants where their equipment wasn't appropriately winterized and it couldn't deliver. Significant reliability problem. We also saw the same thing in 2021 in Texas. There, they had 100 fatalities as a result of this, and 2/3 of their failures were gas plants. Um, as a result of this, the value that our grid treats gas for capacity, or how reliable it is, has been downgraded. So in response, they try to procure more capacity so we can make up for it. Um, although, as I said, right now, about 60% of our generation on the grid is gas, and that's more than it was in 2022. So yeah, a lot of eggs in that basket. We used to be more than 90% coal and nuclear just 20 years ago. Now gas and nuclear make the vast majority of our generation. So what do we do about it? Well, PJM, our grid operator, they proposed um, allowing 50 new projects to essentially jump ahead of all of those other projects that are in the queue that are stuck in the queue and not being built. Of those 50 projects, there were a few of them in Pennsylvania. The biggest one was the restart of 3 Mile Island. Um, is now called the Crane Clean Energy Center. This was a deal with Microsoft. So Microsoft is paying Constellation to restart this plant, and the energy from this is going to serve a data center in Virginia. Um, so that's one of the projects that's going to be added. And then we had some small uprates in gas and wind, very, very tiny. But all of these are years away. So we have this immediate issue with increasing demand. We have costs absolutely going through the roof. We have plenty of clean energy projects stuck in the queue that aren't getting to be built. Um, and the solution is things that aren't going to get built for years. I mean, 3 to 5 years optimistically to build these new projects. Um, so that's going to cause generation costs to go up, capacity costs to go up continually, and exacerbate this problem we have with energy costs. So what can we do in Pennsylvania that can address this issue in the short term? And diversification is probably the biggest thing. So energy efficiency, clean energy, community energy, and we can talk about what these are. Energy efficiency, certainly the watts you don't use are the cheapest and cleanest. This picture here is actually a very smart water heater. It's a hybrid water heater. Um, they're more expensive initially, but this particular one I installed 2 years ago, and it's probably already paid for itself in efficiency. It's much, much more efficient than conventional heaters. So things like that we can do in the short term and lower our electric bills. Clean energy and storage, while some of these big projects are stuck, things like rooftop solar, we can still do. Now, one of the problems with this is right now, today, there is a 30% tax credit for new uh, solar installations like this uh, because of the one big beautiful bill that passed earlier this year. That tax credit is going to end at the end of the year. Um, They'll still be cost effective to install rooftop solar after that, but that 30% tax credit really is a nice incentive. Um, but tax credits for energy efficiency and renewable energy, the federal government is expiring. Um, the bigger stuff, the utility scale solar, we can certainly build a lot more of that, get things out of the queue and get them built. Uh, they are the Solar is the least expensive form of generation on the grid. It's cheaper to build new solar plants than run existing gas plants in many cases. Highly reliable. There are some challenges. We've seen challenges, with land use, and a lot of claims about, well, we don't want to put solar on farms. Uh, right now, the biggest problem with farm loss is building low density housing on farms, far more than building solar. That's usually what happens when a farm goes out of business. Solar can be used to preserve farms and it can be combined with agriculture, but we certainly need more education about those projects. Um, certainly combining solar with storage as well are some of the things we need to do. Um, there's a few things out there that we can, bills out there that can address some of these problems. These are very few of the bills. One of them is the PJM transparency bill that passed the House with actually strong bipartisan support, Representative Rabb's bill. And what this does is utilities who are many of them members at a grid operator PJM and have a lot of control there. Right today, their votes are secret in Pennsylvania. Other states have said no, that you cannot, you basically have to disclose how you vote. So if you're voting in some way that would discourage clean energy, you need to, that needs to be public. Um, this bill would require in Pennsylvania what we see in several other states now is we don't have secret votes there that are controlling how our grid works. Um, the community energy bill, Representative Schweier's bill, what this would do is say to the 50 or 75% of Pennsylvanians that can't put solar on your roof, you could buy or lease a share of a centralized system and have it treated much like it's on your roof. So it expands solar access and would encourage new construction. Also, Representative Frail-Otten's bill, the press bill. This is part of Governor Shapiro's lightning plan, and this would increase targets for clean energy in Pennsylvania. Right now, our clean energy target is 8%, with 0.5% of that being solar. The press bill would target 35% clean energy by 2035, which would help diversify the grid. So I will stop there. I see we have 10 minutes left and see if there are questions. I will stop my sharing.
Thank you so much, Rob, for your expertise and for your insightful overview of the landscape. I'll open it to the floor for questions. And we
I
can
see
even
the
start. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I see the one question about uh, why can't they join the grid? Uh, so initially, our grid operator was expected a new power plant would be a fairly rare thing, where you would see one or two new power plants maybe a year get proposed. So they had a certain structure for a fairly small number. What we've seen recently is because clean energy has become far and away cheaper to build than power plants, we see lots of smaller clean energy projects. So rather than have dozens of clean energy projects across the grid, we have thousands, and they simply weren't prepared for the onslaught of work. This didn't just affect PJM; it happened to every other power grid. PJM has been particularly behind in, and there's policy reasons for certainly disagreements in policy about why they've been particularly slow in getting their queue cleared out and getting things built. But it's been a significant problem. And now even projects that can get out of the queue, it's hard to be delayed for 5 years and keep your financing and keep your options on your land and all of that. And so we're seeing projects that even when they get out of the queue, they can't get built because of effects of these delays. Employment opportunities in this area. So right now, the two biggest growth industries by the Bureau of Labor Statistics were uh, solar installers and wind technicians, um, up there with nursing, of being really big growth industries. So yeah, there certainly are a lot of employments there. Uh, One of the things we're seeing about data centers is not a lot of employment with data centers. So we're seeing a big push for uh, bring this new industry into the state. But there are some questions about what is the benefit going to be? Because largely the point of a data center is really to reduce jobs um, rather than to create jobs. The So how do you see nurses getting involved? So yeah, well, one of the well, we're obviously we do a lot of lobbying we're a C3, but to the extent we can lobby, we'll lobby in Harrisburg, talk to legislators, educate legislators about clean energy issues, the importance of clean energy issues, and the importance of environmental protection. One of the things that always helps is people from the healthcare community talking to the legislators from a health perspective. Um, we can go in and be like energy nerd talking about energy policy with somebody. That's often a challenging meeting. But if the legislator has heard from their constituents to say, I've got people telling me they are concerned about what are we doing about our asthma rates in our schools? And some of our schools are really, really terrible in that regard, or some issue like that. We can go in and say, yeah, so here is where energy connects to that. Here's where the environmental impacts connect to that. And here are some of the policies that you could do to address that. So talking to legislators, even if it seems like they're not listening or it's, just you know, yelling at clouds sometimes, it it really does help. Yeah, good question about communities build their own clean energy supply. There's an ongoing challenge in Pennsylvania right now. There's actually a part of the municipal code says municipalities can do just that. Um, and Pennsylvania has thousands of municipalities and different levels of different breakdown of what they are. We have one town, but thousands of municipalities in Pennsylvania. Um, and they are actually, a group is actually challenging, well, the Public Utility Commission and others to say, no, they want to do just that. This is an ongoing fight. So they're, that will be in the courts for a little while, but that's something we want to work on. Also, the community energy program, if we can get that legislation passed, that would allow small groups to say, essentially join together and you know subscribe or build and share clean energy networks. So there's some great models we can do there, but we're working on getting that legislation passed. Um, the was that 504? Um, try to keep the numbers straight in my head. It was yeah, HB 504 is the clean energy is the community energy bill, and that's what that would do. It used to be called community solar. This bill has expanded a little bit to allow things like methane digesters and other things besides solar in that mix. But yeah, HB 504, and that's also considered one of the Governor Shapiro's lightning plan bills across along with press, the 500, 501, 502, 503, 504. They're all lightning plan. Yeah, reduce energy costs in the near term for people who are struggling to pay heating and cooling bills. Yeah, this is tough. I mean, the our really front line of defense, especially going into the cooling or heating season right now, was LIHEAP that is having significant issues with that heating assistance program. Um, that's um, that's going to be a big challenge. Um, things to the extent that we can do investments in energy efficiency, um, those are great. A lot of our utilities, I didn't talk about it. We do have a separate act called Act 129, um, where it requires utilities to invest a certain amount in energy efficiency. So people can go to their utility website and it probably won't say Act 129 on it, but if you search for energy efficiency rebates on your utility website, it'll usually come up with some things that they'll have, maybe clean energy audits, insulation, maybe um, rebates on high efficiency appliances, things like that. That those are certainly things that are worth checking out. Um, now, if somebody is you know, it the issue surrounding poverty and energy poverty particularly is really challenging because without assistance, the ability to afford the upgrades to something that is cleaner. They say, poverty is very expensive. You can't, if you can't afford more efficient appliances, then you're stuck. Uh, then you're stuck. Now there are some programs where there is some funding for that, um, but very, very challenging.
Really excellent questions. I think we have time for one more.
Maybe we're out of questions.
Uh, so then we can, I will end it on one last slide. Let me pull up. And this ties nicely with your final remarks. So I do want to highlight this call to action, that what we can do to make our voice heard. First, again, starting by, as Rob mentioned, doing what you can to reach out to your policymakers and legislators, calling, emails, scheduling a short meeting, just sharing your perspective, especially as part of the health sector, to explain how clean energy is a health issue, particularly as we think about the clinical setting. Um, really stories that these policies can remember because they put a human face to the issue. And I've listed 2 active petitions, very much related to the talk of today, that you both, that can be every signature, every call, every conversation really helps build this momentum to protect clean energy progress and advance health equity in our community. So I'll stop right there. And I want to again thank you so much, Rob, again for your time and your expertise and a very thoughtful Q&A. And I want to thank again everyone for being here. It was wonderful conversation today.
Thank you very much. And wish I had less depressing things to talk about, but thank you, everybody.
I'm so hopeful. So why we do this part work. So have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Take care. Thank you again so much for joining.
Oh.
And I'll share the recording.